So why are we doing assessments? Assessments are always given to you to give you the opportunity to express your understanding of what you're learning. So demonstrating your understanding via the assessments. Then we give you this mark, 60%, 70%, 50%, whatever it is. And then that's what goes towards your degree. Okay. And it's important when you're demonstrating your understanding that to do that, then perhaps understanding your module learning outcomes becomes important. And we will look at those learning outcomes because they always relate to the assessment. Because the assessment relates to the module, it will relate to the module learning outcomes. And also that all of this helps you, as I say, frame your assessment. So it absolutely uncovers what it is precisely that you've been asked to do. So you have a question, but when you look at the question and the learning outcomes between the two, then you have a really good understanding of what's involved. Okay. So, yeah, so we're going to look at understanding the question, the types of question, you know, the fact that there are 3 elements to a question: task, words, topic, focus. That there are little things, small things with big implications, little words or comment or things that can be added into a question that you might skip over, but in actual fact, you have to pay close attention to. And then how at the end of all of that, once you understand the question, then you create more questions. And that's what allows you to access developing an answer. That's what allows you to answering those further questions. I'll make sense of that when I get to it. And then how you'll do reading, planning in a kind of in a cycle rather than you do the reading and you do the planning. Okay. So yeah, very briefly, before when you were answering a question, and I want you to make this key difference, before when you when you were asked a question at college or you were given a question at school, secondary, whatever, you could basically, the marker is looking to you to mention certain things, literally talk about this, talk about this, talk about this, talk about this, and we'll give you marks for that. And everybody goes home happy. So you're thinking about recalling. But at university, the difference is the question is too particular for you to randomly throw stuff in as an answer. So there's, you know, sometimes you say in an exam when you're stuck, what I did was I wrote everything I knew. I just wrote everything down and hoped that I would get marks. It's just that that's not going to work here. And sometimes when people write the accident, it's not on purpose, but accidentally they don't write the relevant stuff to the question. So they'll put stuff in the essay and it doesn't get them any marks because it's not relevant. It's part of the module. It may be part of the general gist of what we've been asked to do, but there are things in the question that are too specific to allow you to talk about everything. So by accident, you may put in stuff that's not relevant. And of course, relevance is one of the key things in academic writing. So understanding the question is the key to making everything you write as relevant as possible. Therefore, ticking that box in terms of the 5 things. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is task words. You know, they shape an assessment. They're, you know, they're instructions that influence the content and the structure of an essay or a report. I believe we will be talking about a report here, but any piece of academic writing, it influences it. So let's look at some. And there's a few. Holy moly, we have to put them. There's many. We have to put them in alphabetical order, right? And I'm just going to skip forward to the next slide and say there's 2 pages and we've not even got to E yet, or we've just got to E. Sorry, right? So there's one I want to identify here. Or basically, I just want to say that these are all different, right? Compare, identify the similarities and differences. Sorry, let me get my... Identify the similarities and differences. So that's comparing, which is different from assess, which is to weigh up to what extent something is true, which is different to clarify, which is literally making something clearer and, where appropriate, simplify. So if you're asked to clarify rather than compare, you're doing something different in the essay. So the whole vibe of the essay changes. So you've got to look at the task word, you've got to identify the task word, and then which is basically what have you been asked to do. So I'll move on to the next one. Critically evaluate is one. Sorry, I just want to briefly go back to this one. So what I do is I've simplified compare, and I've identified that when I see the word compare, immediately my mind jumps to similarities and differences. How are these two things or three things or however many things, how are they similar and how are they different? So, you know, the difference between a car and a bus. A car and a bus are similar because they're modes of transport. They transport people. The differences are one's carries a lot more people than the other one. It's run as a business. The other one is much smaller and it's privately owned generally. So that's it. Similarities and differences. Critically evaluate is, give your verdict as to what extent a statement or findings within a piece of research are true, or to what extent you agree with them. Okay, so you're asked to critically evaluate something. You know, provide evidence that both agrees and contradicts an argument. Come to find, but my shorthand for this is when I see critically evaluate, I just see give something a score out of 10 with words. So I would say if I agree with something, I would give it 9 out of 10. If I didn't like it, I would give it 1 out of 10. And again, for that, with that in mind, I would like you in the chat box. I'm going to ask you 2 questions about something, and I want you to give me that score out of 10 for each question. So the first question is, how well do you think the NHS has coped with, or the staff, how well have the staff in the NHS dealt with COVID so far? If you were to give them the staff of the NHS a score out of 10, what would you give them for the work they've put in for COVID? And that's all I'm looking for, you to type in a number. Right, 9, 10. Okay, brilliant. So 10 out of 10, difficult job, unprecedented. So there you go. And thanks, Sheila. And Sheila's put in the reason, which is a justification for it. And that's it. So if you were doing an essay, you would drop the 10 out of 10 bit, but you would just put in the written part where you say it's a difficult job in unprecedented circumstances. But you're right, 10 out of 10. Now, here's another thing. So the other thing is there's general agreement. Everybody's giving them a high score because generally we can all agree on roughly how it's been and how well they've done. You know, it's obvious from the news, from what we've read in the papers. We can gather evidence. We're not just saying 9 or 10 out from nowhere, but we have evidence for it. So the next question is, how well do you think the Conservative government, Boris Johnson in particular, how well do you think they've handled the pandemic? A score out of 10. Complete agreement that you don't give them any marks. So they've made, arguably what you're saying with that is they've made a complete arse of it almost every step of the way, which it'd be difficult to disagree with. And you could get all the things and you could get the evidence and you could do that. So that, and So critical evaluation, that is basically what it is. We can all do it. We can all do it based on, but when we ask you to critically evaluate, which is one of the most common assessments at university, it's the same thing, but it's the evidence you have to work out, rather than it being something that's, the examples I've given you, you've been immersed in, you've been given that evidence through the news, through newspapers and everything all the time. So it's been easy to do, but for this, you're going to have to develop that understanding of whether something's a good thing, a positive thing, an effective thing, or it's a negative, damaging, causes problems type thing. But it's basically giving something a score out of 10 with words rather than with numbers. So when you write the essay, if you write the essay about the NHS staff, that essay is going to be full of positives with maybe some negatives, because that's the way it breaks down. You will try and find the positives and the negatives, but the positives will far outweigh. And then when you do the thing about the Tory government, arguably, it's going to be full of negatives with very few positives. So, and there's other ones. And I think what the next slide said is, the thing is that you have to understand them. You could Google task words or university task words or essay task words, and you'll get lots of different versions with different meanings. The important thing is to understand one, and like I think, always try and get your own meaning. So I'm similarities and differences. I'm a score of 9 out of 10 in words, and then that helps me, and then I can locate them. Okay. So there's a couple of other words that sometimes sneak their way into questions. And one is, you might say comment. You might get the question that says, discuss the performance of the Tory government on the pandemic and comment on their actions. Now that comment, all I'm saying is that comment is not, it's not a descriptive comment. It's an evaluation, so it's an assessment. So it's comment it's did they do it good? Did they do it bad? Yeah, they got this wrong. They got this wrong. They got this wrong. That's your comment. It's not when you say comment on the government. It's not say, well, there's 600 MPs and they all go to the House of Commons. For me, that comment is like, that's where they're telling you to do a critical analysis, but they're doing it in a very subtle way. Right, illustrate just means use examples. So what's your examples? Well, they didn't do this, they didn't shut down, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. They were wasteful. And here's an example. Also around theory, you can use examples. So you might have a theory that says social marketing is becoming more common. And then you give an example of something happening on Twitter or Facebook that reflects that. And that's an example of some other comment. So make sure every word is considered. So now I want to do is look at task words and questions. And we've discussed two of them. So compare and contrast the 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes in terms of their potential to influence this political sphere. So I've picked out the task words first here. So you've got, compare and contrast, which we know similarities and differences. And then we've got this middle one, which is to what extent do you agree with this statement? In other words, how true is it? Now, that, funnily enough, it's not that different from a critical evaluation. It's just a different way of doing it. So when it says, to what extent do you agree with it? You could only come to that opinion if you've critically evaluated it and found out if it's true or not. So the fact that the comment, to what extent, always follows a statement. So the statement here is an assertion, it's a claim. The Gallic revival was the most important factor in advancing separatist nationalism. So all you have to do is to say, well, where's all the evidence that it was the most important factor? And where's the evidence that something else was more important or that was not as important? And then once you've done all of that, you can say, in the essay, you can say, by the evidence provided, it is fairly clear or obvious that it was the most important factor or it wasn't the most. And that's, to me, it's another way of saying critically evaluate, but it's understanding that to what extent do you agree with, you've got to work out how true something is. And it's usually a statement. The third one is the critically evaluate. So it's this 9 out of 10, sorry, 9 out of 10. Give a score out of 10 for the direct and indirect effects of Donald Trump's executive order, blah, blah, blah. So this one, we're given a 9 out of 10. Sorry, we're given a score out of 10. Why do I keep saying 9 out of 10? We give a score out of 10 for that. So then we're going to look at the next part. Now, the next part is the topic of the question. So that's the topic of the question is a bigger thing. So all questions have this big thing. So the big thing in the question is, part of this question is the 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes. Now, you don't need to understand what that was. You don't, I'm not asking you, we're not going to look at that, but I'm just saying that's the big bit. And I'm able to establish that that's the topic and that's important. So that will have play some part in your answer. And then the next one for question 2, it's the Gaelic or Gaelic revival, which is the big topic, the big thing. And then for the third one, I think it's Donald Trump's executive order is the big thing to be talked about. So these are the things that are the kind of bigger things that have to be talked about. And these, generally the topic in a question is a topic in the module. It may relate to a lecture or a couple of lectures or a group of lectures, but there'll be this big thing. So for you, it might be garment construction, it may be fashion trends, it may be something like that, but it's that kind of general topic. So identify that so you know that's the kind of the general area that this essay or whatever is going to, or this report or whatever is going to be in. But then the next one is the focus. Now the focus pinpoints the thing that makes the question more specific. And it's what I call it frames it. So it says that although we're talking about the 3 dimensions of power of the Gaelic revival of Donald Trump, the thing is, the important bit is one, its potential to influence the political sphere. So the first question, we're only comparing, contrasting these things in the way that they influence politics. No other way. Nothing else they do is important. Nothing else is relevant. Okay. When we talk about the Gaelic revival, we're not necessarily getting into any great detail about the revival itself, but the question is specifically asking, was it the most important factor? Was it the thing that drove on separatist nationalism or not? Some people say it did, some people didn't say it. What do you think? And then for the next one, when we talk about this, it's Donald Trump's executive order. And to give you a little bit of background, this was when Donald Trump kind of basically banned people from foreign countries coming to the US. And this question is not asking when he banned them, how many people he banned them, but what he's saying, what they're asking here is what were the direct and indirect effects of it on America, on the people traveling? What were the direct and indirect effects of this travel ban? So that's a focus. So there's always a focus in a question you should look out for that says, if you talk about other stuff about the things in blue, the topics, they may not be relevant to the question and may not get you marks because the question will always have a specific point that makes it. That's what we're looking at. Okay, I want to move on now and actually start to deconstruct the question that you've been given in one of your modules. Module I've chosen is Enterprising Behaviours for the Business Professional. Here it is. I've taken this from the brief, and as we've done before, I've split it down into what you've been asked to do is yellow, topic of the question is blue, the focus of the question, and if they're asking you to use any examples, that would be there. I think when they say demonstrate, interestingly, demonstrate progression. there's an inference that you'll be using examples there. But let's look at the question. You are expected to demonstrate progression through the key concepts and contexts via reflection on your personal development from your learning journey over trimester A. Two things you've been asked to do. One is to show to demonstrate progression, and in this case, how have you improved? If you progress, you make improvement, you develop. How have you developed? Through the key concepts and contexts, and also via reflection. So that's looking inward, looking to yourself on your personal development. And the key concepts and the personal development are the focus, looking at the topic, which is your learning journey over trimester A. That's the general place that you're looking at, but it's reflection on your personal development and its demonstration and progression of the key concepts and contexts. So the focus is very much what's in green. Generally, it's this learning journey over trimester B, because what the whole module is about is trying to help you develop certain skills and attributes that will make you more employable when you graduate. They've also added this really useful bit, which for me, I suppose, would all be examples. You are expected to take into account your reflective logs, previous work experience, university experience, self-evaluation, diagnostic tests, and any feedback you have received from appropriate others at university or at work to help evidence your reflective writing. So in other words, there's a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of materials, experience that you can look to when you're reflecting on yourself and when you're doing that. And I think that's very important. These are all the sources of information that can help you decide how you're progressing through the key concepts and contexts of the module. So basically what that part says is this is where your evidence is located. What you write about yourself in your reflective logs, and that can be about, so there could be things that you demonstrate about yourself in previous work, or there'll be something happened to you at university and you can look back in that and say, I have built up this skill, I have this attribute, I know how to work in this situation. And then you've got these self-evaluations and diagnostic tests, which are your Honey and Mumfords. What kind of leader are you? What kind of person are you in a group? Those kind of tests that are supposed to, if you answer mostly A's in a multiple choice, it makes you this kind of person. If you answer mostly B's, it makes you this kind of person. Those kind of things may be indicative and may be useful to you. Now, importantly, based on that, I have looked to, and here are the module learning outcomes for this module. So this is what this module is trying to do. It's trying to teach you. And I think I've highlighted the things that are going to be useful to you or are most relevant to the question you've been asked. So the first one, in module learning outcome 1, develop enterprising behaviours, attitudes and skills to enhance employability. And basically what all the assessment doing is saying, well, how much of that have you done? So the other thing is, it says it's going to show you how to reflect on areas of past and potential employment, career development, digital identity, and the observation of professional behaviours in real life settings. So that's another thing it's going to help you with. By the end of that, you'll be able to do this. So this module's helping you do those. Then module learning outcome 4, I think it's another one that has something to bring, because you've got to understand about GCU graduate attributes. Demonstrate a creative understanding of the youth. That part not so much. As well as GCU graduate attributes, of being an active and global citizen, responsible leadership and confidence, and how these translate into the skills that you would use in your jobs. In other words, it's what is it about being a GCU graduate that lends itself or turns into the skills that you can use in the workplace. And then finally, module learning outcome 5, expanding awareness of the personal and professional strengths, capabilities and development needs pertinent to themselves and to their own areas, or pertinent to you and your area of intended employment, and use of reflection on the ongoing experience. So again, everything highlighted in yellow is kind of reflected in what you've been asked to do. So this module is absolutely going through and helping you learn those things. I've looked at the lecture. This is a list of lectures. And the ones, again, I've highlighted in yellow, I feel, are the ones that especially are going to be really useful to you in what you're trying to do, so that when you go back to the question, you say, I've been asked to look at this and I've been asked to do this. There will literally be things in those lectures that will be useful to you. And there could be more. Looking at it now, I'd also say probably lecture 7 and lecture 8. I mean, but all I'm saying is that if you take the question into your lectures, if you think about the assessment when you're in a lecture and you have questions in front of you, or you're thinking, I need to know about this and I need to know about that, then the lecture might give you the answers, or might point you in the right direction, or give you, talk about authors that you should read. But they're going to be very helpful, and it's making that connection between the two, making that connection between the question and what the module's actually teaching you will help you write the assessment itself. So if we go back to the question here, I've got the question again, and I'm thinking, let's develop our plan, and I'm saying we can do that by creating more questions. These are 3 key questions I think if you look at and address through what's been told in the lectures, seminars, etc., you can then start to plan and answer that question. And the very much the first one is, what are the key concepts and contexts? What do they mean when they say key concepts and contexts? And your personal development. In other words, what are the things that you're supposed to have progressed in personally? And that probably means that what are the skills and behaviours I'm supposed to attain or improve? So I'm supposed to be developing towards a point of arguably being a GCU attributed graduate. So what is it I'm going to be? What are those things? The other point for me is, if you're making a progression, then you're moving from one place to another. You're developing from what you are to what you want to be. So you have to, 3 things you need to know are, where am I now? How do I rate myself in terms of all these things I'm supposed to have? So when I look at myself and I look at all these attributes, have I half of them? Have I some of them? Have I none of them? Etc. And where do I need to be? How much? What's the thing I'm aiming to get? What are all the attributes I need to get for me personally in my field of work? And how do I get there? What's my plan to get them all on board? How am I going to develop these skills? And for me, that's going to be the basis of this assessment. So basically you're saying, I have discovered all these attributes and I understand all these attributes that I should have. These ones I have, absolutely. These ones I need to develop. And this is how I'm going to do it. And in doing so, you will answer this question. And then at that point, you're into the reading planning cycle. So you're starting to plan out what kind of things are you going to discuss, breaking down what kind of paragraphs you're going to have, what kind of sections in your work you're going to have, and you're going to start to say, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about this. And also that you're going to be reading. You're going to be reading to bring in some of the academic, as well as looking at your reflective logs, etc., which will bring you in some of the skills that you have. You will also look towards the theory to let that help you understand what these skills are like and how these skills benefit you. So you'll be reading and developing your plan, and then as you look at your plan, you'll probably spot, I need to know a bit more about this, I need to expand on this point, I need to do a little bit more here, and then you go back to the reading so that you can do that. The important thing about this last slide is that reading and planning is not a linear process. It's not that you do all your planning, you do all your reading, then you do all your planning, you start writing. I'd like to think that you go back to the reading every now and again to bring more sources in, to make what you're writing about more complex, and then plan some more and then go back. Be prepared to go back to the reading to develop your points. I hope this has been useful to you. Obviously, if you've got any questions or anything, you can email me, and I'll see you next time in the class. Thanks very much.